welcome to the Life of Purpose. Today we continue our way through the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, looking at how do we live an authentic Christian life. And today we're looking at Matthew, the 5th chapter, verses 10 through 12.
And in that, Jesus talks about how there's likelihood we're going to be persecuted. And so Matthew 5:10 says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness," or right relatedness to God, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you and falsely accuse you on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Now, I find it difficult for Jesus to say, happy are you when people persecute you.
Yeah.
And like they did the prophets in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't pleasant.
No.
It wasn't, they weren't nice to the prophets in the past. And the persecution Jesus was talking about wasn't pleasant. Now, Eugene Peterson in The Message puts it this way. He says, "Blessed are you when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you to an even deeper experience into the kingdom of God." So, with that interpretation, persecution is something that helps us develop, deepen, strengthen who we are and who we are in God. And so that kind of depth of spiritual development doesn't happen without persecution.
Right. And you know, and there's truth that if you're going with a life, trying to live a life that is authentically Christian, and you've taken into account all of the things we've talked about in the Beatitudes, and you're trying to embody those in who you are as a Christian in your world, and you're trying to be, focused and pure of heart and all of those things, hungry and thirsty for righteousness and all, you're going to be different than the world around you. And that will absolutely draw attention. Now, I do think that what the Apostle Paul said once is critical to mention here, and that is that we should be good ambassadors of Jesus Christ. Which means as we're doing all of these things, as we're living and trying to seek and hunger and thirst for righteousness and seek to live an authentic Christian life, we should not be self-righteous. And how we present the gospel to people in our life should be as a good ambassador of Jesus Christ. And if you think about an ambassador, you think about someone who represents or embodies the best of their company if you're a corporate ambassador, or the best of your city if you're a civic ambassador. You're talking about the best, and you're showing the best, and you're representing the best. And so we think about that as we're living our life as an authentic Christian in the world. It's still going to draw attention to us, but the attention should be because we're trying to live the best representation of Christ. I love the story that Ellsworth Callis used to tell about a pastor who said one day a church member came in to see him and said that he said they were complaining about their life, and they said, the problem is no one likes me in where I work because I'm just an outspoken Christian. And the pastor, I don't know, maybe had a long day.
Yeah, had his coffee.
Had his coffee. Maybe he just decided to call it like he saw it. And the pastor just looked at him and said, "No, I really think that they don't like you because you're just unpleasant." And I mean, we're not supposed to be unpleasant out in the world as we live as an outspoken Christian, as we live as an authentic Christian. We're not supposed to be trying to stir things up, because it's going to happen because we're going to live differently.
In history, when you look back at the persecutions that happened, they started pretty quickly.
Right.
And so Jesus was preparing the disciples, those listening, that this was coming. So Paul talks about how, you're going to be persecuted.
Right. He warns Timothy that persecution will happen.
And James says you should find joy in persecution.
Right.
It's like, really? I mean, but it came from Nero, and it came from other of the Roman emperors and the whole empire.
Yeah, from the stoning of Stephen in the Acts of the Apostles, from the stoning of Stephen until present day, persecutions happen. And truly, you mentioned Nero. I mean, he really developed an art form of persecution, and it was horrific. But from Stephen to now, there's always been persecution.
And it happens today in countries that are often dictatorships, or they are of a different religion that makes Christianity illegal, or any religion illegal. And so we're not familiar so much with our lives truly being at stake,
Right.
but they could be. And we have to, as followers of Jesus, be prepared for that. Now, sometimes, kind of like the person that pastor talked to, we can sort of take this a little bit too far. And there were even people in Christian history who made martyrdom that they would purposely try to get martyred, so that they would be able to fulfill this. And that's not God's purpose either.
Right.
He wants us to live the authentic Christian life, and if that brings on that kind of persecution, it does. But it doesn't mean that we have to purposefully go out and find a hill to die on that Jesus wasn't willing to die on.
Right.
There's some things that we can make such an important piece of faith that we're going to absolutely stand and take our stand right here. When, if you really kind of got into prayer with God and said, God, of the top 100 things, what would you die over? That wasn't one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes we take an aspect of our faith and the way we're living our faith, or maybe what we're processing and how we're growing in the moment, and we make that a litmus test that we apply to everyone else. And so we end up sometimes doing more damage than doing good by holding them accountable to our standard of Christianity, when it may be that they're not there yet. And we're not encouraging them to grow to that point. Instead, we're actually persecuting them because they're, as Paul would say, they're still drinking milk while maybe we're eating meat because we're older and we've been Christian longer. And so we're here, they're there. And instead of reaching back and saying, here, let me help you grow, we're persecuting them because they're not quite where we are.
And you see this again in social media, especially, where people make these bold comments: if you don't believe this, then this. And you sort of are setting yourself up for making one issue the entirety of the faith, where it's really not down to that one issue. Now, to me, I think probably the most noble place these days to be persecuted is to be the one who's not willing to be polarized.
Right.
Who says, I'm not going to buy into this or that. It's either this way or absolutely this way. But those who try to find peace in the middle and who try to understand and truly hear what other people are saying, I'm fascinated by those people who get persecuted, because that's really what God called us to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the physical persecution may not come. I mean, I pray that none of us are physically persecuted because that's just horrible. But as followers of Christ, we can expect in today's world probably some kind of persecution. And probably what Jesus mentions, that will be reviled or lied about. Because when you are trying to live that authentically Christian life, and you're trying to find ways to be the peacemaker, and you're trying to be pure of heart, and trying to hunger and thirst for righteousness, and you're trying to do all of these things that the Beatitudes talk about, well, people are either going to admire that, they're going to see something in that they're going to want to be and to have in their life as well, and they're going to want to deepen their faith, and they're going to want to grow, because in that moment you're being a good ambassador of Jesus Christ, or they're not. and they're going to resent it. And they're going to think that you're weird and you're odd, and
Or that you're not courageous because
because you're not making this stand or you're not doing that. And so then they're going to try to malign you and discredit your goodness, and you can be called a hypocrite, and you can be called all these other names and the persecution that we often find is people figure out which name to call us and which thing to say to us that hurts the most. And it's like when they don't tell you that I'm angry with you, they tell you I'm just disappointed. Because most of us in life, we don't like disappointing people. And so that's one of the key phrases. And so they'll find ways to do that. And so we may not be physically persecuted, but we can still be persecuted, being, as Jesus says, reviled and lied about. It always makes me go back to that children's rhyme of, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But I think the other phrasing I've heard is sticks and stones may break my bones, physical persecution, but name calling, reviling, and lying about, names can kill my spirit. Mm-hmm. And if we're not careful, that can happen. And so that's why we have to, as Eugene Peterson's translation says, when we're feeling that persecution, whatever that may be, it needs to drive us to spend more time with God, to spend more time in the presence of God, in prayer, in study, so that we are strong enough to withstand whatever that persecution might be.
Yeah, so truly, this becomes a spiritual moment for us, where when we are persecuted, we're driven deeper to know God even more, to become more pure of heart, to hunger and thirst for God even more, because we realize that all these things that other people are fighting over or wanting us to fight over are not that key to who God is.
Right.
And it is there when we're driven into that depth of spirituality that we truly find happiness, that we truly find blessed life, and that we truly find our Christ-centered life of purpose.
Absolutely.